Hi again, everybody. For this part of the discussion, I'm wearing a very different hat. My name is Ken Umezaki. I am, as I described earlier, the founder of a company called Digital Daruma, and we do a bunch of things related to the new music ecosystem. One of the things that I've gotten involved in over the last year is actually thinking about rights management and using the blockchain to do that. We have a company that I co-founded with 4 other people called Blockchain Music, and so I will be representing that. And unfortunately, my partner, who was supposed to moderate the panel, is unable to attend today, so I'm also going to try to moderate the panel. So a couple of hats at the same time. I think maybe very quickly, just an introduction in terms of who you are, and then we'll get the process started. So Turo, maybe you can start.
Okay, my name is Turo Pekari. I work at Teosto. Teosto is the CMO for musical authors in Finland. My job is basically focusing on music and tech innovation and research.
Great. Marko Ahtisaari. I'm CEO and co-founder of Sync Project, which is developing music as a precision medicine. We are also collecting large amounts of data from everyday use of music for health and functional purposes like focusing, concentration, relaxation, and exercise. And just today, we actually announced a sync music bot for Slack. So if you want sets of music delivered and tailored to you for particular phases of the day, starting with a good productive morning with music to work to, just syncsyncmusicbot.com. The reason I think I'm on this panel is I'm a director's fellow at the MIT Media Lab, where we've started something called the Open Music Initiative, which we'll talk about a little bit, applying blockchain-like architectures to the problem of music rights. So very happy to be here.
And Bruno is running late, so we will have Bruno join us in a moment. He's the CEO of a company called Revelator. Maybe to just level set, I'll spend just a quick minute or two on sort of the relevance of blockchain to the music industry and sort of what's going on. At its simplest form, blockchain technology represents a decentralized ledger where you can record transactions and monitor the changes associated with transactions over time. There actually are a number of blockchains out there. The most famous, at least currently, is probably the Bitcoin blockchain. There are a number of dedicated blockchains that you can leverage for various use cases. Those would include Ethereum. Intel has a new one called Sawtooth Lake. IBM has something that they're developing called Fabric, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a number of blockchains out there, all which have the same characteristics: decentralized ledger, basically technology. In addition to that, there are a number of music-specific applications, either that have dedicated chains associated with them or are leveraging one of these core chains. So just to list a few of them, the company I mentioned earlier, Blockchain Music, is one. We have something called Ujo Music. There's a company called Media Chain, Chainvine, Consensus, Alexandria, et cetera, et cetera. As it relates to music-related application development, in our sort of looking at the world, there's probably about 10 different application providers today that are focused on predominantly the challenges associated with opening up, if you will, the rights management part of the world. Then there are a number of actual sort of new tech companies that are leveraging blockchain technology, and those would include Revelator, which we'll hear from Bruno in a sec, as well as a company, for example, called Dubset Media, which is working on DJ mixes and is leveraging the blockchain for a component of the service that they're providing. So that's kind of a broad overview of sort of what's out there in terms of the tech. Hopefully that gets us grounded a bit in our discussion. And maybe, Marko, you can talk a little bit about OMI in the context of some of the non-private, if you will, or other efforts that are going on today.
Yeah, the Open Music Initiative was brought together by essentially academic institutions, starting with Berklee College of Music in Boston and Berkeley's Institute of Creative Entrepreneurship. And they approached us and several other academic institutions to host if you like, a group of companies that would commit to bringing about a new kind of music rights registry using distributed ledger technology of some kind. What is that problem we are trying to solve? Well, the world is going to streaming entirely, and in a significant amount of cases, depends on who you asked, 10% to 20 to 30%, depending on the streaming service cannot pay because it's not known who to pay. So there isn't an easily accessible music rights registry. For those of you well versed in this topic, there have been many historical attempts at doing music rights, and typically they have failed because there has been a misalignment of incentives, and someone has not wanted someone else to own the data, and someone are the large players in the industry. And so by using a system which no one owns or controls, but everyone takes care of, which a distributed ledger is with many nodes, we hope we can address this problem. And there are well over 100 companies that signed up, including all the major labels, all the major streaming services except Apple, but Apple eventually, I think, and as well significant publishers. And I should give a heads up or a shout out to Teosto, is one of the only PROs here in globally has signed up, which we applaud, because ultimately I think this is an opportunity, and as serving your customers, this is a great chance. So that's the idea. Bring together and do a reference implementation showing that this can interconnect, but leaving a lot of room for companies to build businesses on top. That's the handwave dream picture. Of course, it's a very contested area, so it takes a long time. Right now, we're doing a minimal viable first step, where we think work registration, or let me put it this, recording and work registration is a key step, as well as a query of that platform. And the working groups are multifaceted from different parts of the industry. It's like an open source project in part, but there's a lot of business people in it, which I don't think is a bad thing in this case, but also hardcore technologists that understand the Bitcoin blockchain and blockchain more generally, like at MIT. So that I think you can ask more questions.
Sure, and in addition to that, the focus of OMI, in addition to sort of the implementation, is also to kind of establish a market-based governance role or best practices role as well. So there's actually, that's the area that I'm actually working with OMI on the most, which is this notion of we collectively as a music business neither share well, I would argue, nor do we have standard best practices that are implemented across multiple organizations. And we need to actually move towards that. If you look at any other industry that has a data centricity around its business model, what you'll find is that there are, in fact, market-based standards that most of the major players will actually agree to collaborate on. And establishing that is an important element of making something like a distributed ledger environment successful as well. Turo, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you see, what's going on here in terms of bubbling up, both in terms of the impact to a PRO, and also perhaps some of the things that you may be able to do that you can't currently do with the people that you represent.
Maybe some experiences first from the Open Music Initiative. My opinion is that collective management societies have a crucial role in building applications based on blockchain, because the data we have is the most important thing. You can't make anything without it. So it's really important that we are a part of this discussion.
Got it. And how do you see any of these implementations? Let's just say, a year, 2 years down the road. We had a brief conversation about this last night. What are some of the things that you feel are the most impactful things that a chain would, or chain-like service would deliver?
For organizations like us, I guess we are very, very likely to have a big role in data governance and data validations in future blockchain implementations. But also one possible way in the future for CMOs to work would be to provide licensing platforms for songwriters and possibly also compete with commercial players in that way.
Got it. Any other sort of futuristic, things that the blockchain promises to do that we can collectively think of at a high level? Why are we building these things? I guess would be a cynical way to ask the question, right?
Well, I think we're building them in this case because these architectures can solve the incentive problem somehow, and I think your points about governance are very important. So these numbers may not be completely correct, but for example, information related to works is located in over 5,000 individual publisher owned or operated databases, and it's certainly not an efficient system. So if you could share it in a place where you knew that the degree of privacy on that information was governed according to some rules and principles, but then you'd benefit from that entire infrastructure being hosted. I think we are, well, one, there is a problem because it's not like, and it's a little bit sad to say it here, but the music industry is a tiny business globally. As much as the personal and the cultural effect and meaningfulness of music, but it's 50 to 60 billion, as you've cited, depending on how you count. It's like the local Indian subsidiary of a pharma company. It's tiny, and it hasn't grown collectively in the last 10, 15 years. It's changed composition internally, and we feel that in everyone that's been in music has felt that. But so any place we can bring efficiency for payment to creators, we need to work on that. It's like an obligation to work on that.
Right.
And then potentially for new areas to grow as we find new applications for music with technology. We'd hope to have the rights issue taken care of by that time.
From my perspective, some factoids, there's 2 trillion digital spins going on in the world now. That was last year's number, apparently, between video and audio streams. It's clearly won the battle. The music industry the recorded music industry for sure anyways, and the publishing world, we're basically a data business now. And, we're in the data business of micro-penny collections, if you will, if you think about the collecting side. You need to have an architecture that can support that in a very, very efficient way. And, the history around how we got here aside, I think there's a tremendous opportunity to create that operational efficiency with whatever version of this thing over time gets developed. I think that's one thing that's super important as a mission. The second one is when I have an experience from the finance lens and actually doing something similar with the product area. If the industry agrees to cooperate, if you will, and create an interoperable environment where the core business values a proposition that a service provides can be maintained, but we all get the benefit of having a collective data set from which to work on. The thing that I've seen happen is innovation becomes far less convoluted and difficult to do. So I'm actually super excited about the fact that if this thing existed at some point in time, the possibility for growing the industry in so many different ways, players like publishers have to worry about collecting micropennies through spreadsheets and can focus on what they love to do, which is actually promote their music, whether it's for sync or placement, or work with their songwriters to make them better. These are the reasons why we got into the music business, not collecting micropennies. So I think there's an operational argument, and then there's an innovation argument around that, which is we don't know what the innovations are, but I know for sure that we're not done creating new experiences, new mechanisms for people to enjoy music in the digital world, whether it's through their phone or on the computer. As those things continue to grow, having a better foundation to actually monitor the activity, I think is a tremendous value proposition. So those are, to me, the promises. I don't know if there's any others that you guys can think of.
Yeah, I agree with Ken on this, that blockchain solution could provide new growth for the traditional music players. I think blockchain is not going to disrupt the whole existing industry. you can see what's been happening in financial industry and the blockchain. The big players are now the ones making the biggest investments into blockchain. That's probably going to happen in music industry as well. Also, there are more like ideological goals like openness and transparency. Maybe what I would like to see more is what are the real new business cases for growth in blockchain solutions, because without them we will probably lack the needed investments.
Got it. Bruno, can you hear us?
I can, yes.
All right, we can hear you as well. Welcome. Bruno from Revelator, by the way.
Late. Thank you.
No problems. Are you in Israel?
I am indeed.
All right, cool. Well, it's wonderful here in Helsinki. I can't believe you're not here.
Let's say it's 25-degree weather here.
Love it. Hey, Bruno, we were just talking about sort of the various benefits that a blockchain-enabled sort of underpinning of the music industry can deliver. Maybe you can give a brief introduction to Revelator, just a very brief one as to what the company's about to get grounded, and maybe talk from your lens about what you're working on and how the chain fits into your value proposition.
Sure. Well, thank you. So my name is Bruno Guez. I'm the CEO and founder of Revelator. Spent the last 20 plus years in the music industry, so I've seen the whole transformation from analog to digital and the different business models. And I think what excites me about the industry today is greater transparency, greater trust in transaction. And I think the explosion of data has created a massive challenge for the industry as well as a massive opportunity. We've never had data before where we could really, solve some of the challenges around transparency. And now everything is a digital transaction and can be measured, which means on the opportunity side, it means people can gain better access to information faster. And I think what's exciting to me on the blockchain side is a more efficient marketplace and faster payments.
Got it. And how are you leveraging blockchain specifically for the Revelator service today, or how do you envision that happening?
So I think today what we're interested in is focusing on the registry, and registering digital assets and having a better transaction chain for transactions that are taking place that are associated to digital assets. And we already make use of smart contracts to create a more executable transaction around payments and royalty distribution. We're not going to focus on core infrastructure or identity just yet, or payments even just yet.
Okay.
But I think just registry and smart contracts is our interest.
Got it. Thank you. So those are some of the benefits that we see, I think, collectively as people working on the chain gang. But having said that, it's a relatively nascent technology. Nascent might be the wrong word, but it's a relatively new thing. It's kind of gotten too buzzworthy, in my personal opinion. Everyone talks about the blockchain and, wow, this holy grail of solution to the music industry or other media verticals. But it's actually a work in progress, I would argue. So I think the next sort of theme that I'd love to cover is get each of your perspectives on sort of, what are some of the limitations of the current state of blockchain? What are some of the things that in practice we might need to adapt or change in order for it to really work for the music industry at a high level? Maybe we'll start with that. I don't know. Do you want to talk?
I think when you say something is nascent, it's a good way to speak about it, because oftentimes there's an analogy to the internet and the web with blockchain, and particularly people and investors that are bullish will say that this is just like the internet and before. But what we need to realize, Joey Ito often says, is this is like early 90s. We're working on the application stack, but TCP/IP, TTP, and we're still putting the pieces together.
Yeah.
So I think one thing that is needed, and which is a block in general, is to have enough, and part of that I think is academic as well. I don't mean this as regulatory or government, but work on the fundamental infrastructure and scaling of transactions. And this is pretty well documented in the Bitcoin case, which is good. But the key thing is that the innovation and experimentation is so fast at the moment that it's a little bit ahead of its skis, because there is money involved. Because even though we say blockchain's not about the coin, it kind of is about the coin, and Bitcoin is there. Mm-hmm. One thing that makes me very hopeful, though, is there's even 12 months ago, we wouldn't have said there would be another stable, in quotes, ecosystem like Ethereum next to Bitcoin, and it has emerged. So there is another system that we can rely on being there for a little while, even though there are glitches as we go. Mm-hmm. So I'm encouraged by that speed of innovation and all of the work going into these, this gets a little bit complex and technical, but on these platforms you can create crypto tokens for particular parts of it or applications or parts of the platform. And this way may be a way to crowdsource and finance. So there are new business models for that as well. And I think for us to figure out those business models, that's going to be a little bit of a hurdle right now, because there'll be a lot of experimentation. And the economics and the incentives are new. It's not like we can point to previously like Netherlands in the 1700s or something. Right, it's new stuff.
Got it. Bruno, do you have a perspective on sort of some of the issues that you're either currently working on or that you foresee as needing to be solved using decentralized ledgers?
Sure. I mean, I think from an industry perspective, the challenge is getting everybody to agree to some form of standards around metadata and perhaps even around contract and payments, processes. Every company, whether it's a DSP or a PRO, have their own databases, have their own processes in place. So getting everybody to agree to one format, and I see that as a challenge. I think there are a lot of amazing use cases for this technology, whether it be in registry and tracking or reporting and audit, or even direct-to-consumer commerce and distribution of digital assets. I just see the OMI initiative has been really good in getting all the stakeholders talking and having a dialogue around how to leverage this technology. So there's been a lot of progress already there over the whole summer. But getting everyone to come to terms with one protocol, I think is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I completely agree. Turo, is there a perspective you have on this?
One important point is also the quality of music reporting data. That's something that blockchain cannot solve. If we get crappy data, it will be also crappy in blockchain. It's a shit in, shit out situation in a kind of way. So maybe it could be wise to make the first implementations in some specific licensing areas where we know that this thing could work, actually.
Yeah, I think that's right. When you start talking about, from my perspective, when you start talking about making sure that the appropriate information is authenticatable, exists across, audio file and other media files themselves, metadata, which we talked about, and ownership information, and then let's make sure we track it over time because ownership changes, et cetera. That's a lot to ask for at this point in time, whether it's the metadata problem or the problem of having standards that are uniformly adopted and executed efficiently. That I think is the challenge. So from the projects that I work on, including blockchain music, we kind of view this as 90% of a people problem, if you will, or industry player problem, adoption issue, if you will, and about a 10% technology issue. I think the technology could be leveraged. We just need to collectively agree over time on the right set of standards that allow us to not have garbage in, garbage out, for example, or enhance data over time by having multiple parties engaged in collaborating on what I call the truth, which is kind of one of our basic tenets on the blockchain side. Just to give you one other, to your point, Marko, I just pulled this up for fun. Transactions per second, some of you are familiar with that, right? The Bitcoin blockchain, for example, right now can handle approximately, sort of 5 to 7 transactions per second. Okay? Now, in a 2.2 billion spins world, it's not clear that it's going to work for everything at this point in time, right? Ethereum, when it first started, was originally at 50 to 100. 10 in 2015, hovering about 50 to 100 over the next year, and has the opportunity to scale up to 50,000 to 100,000 transactions per second. So there are some sort of data transaction limitations in the blockchain that I think we need to actually collectively think about how to manage that change. To give you a sense of how that compares to some payment systems that are out there, Visa handles about 2,000 transactions per second on average, with a peak of 4,000 and a peak capacity of 56,000 transactions per second. That's actually transaction scale on the payment side. PayPal processes apparently 155 transactions per second on average. So we've got a fair amount of work to do to take this decentralized ledger process and ensure that scale can support the full, if you will, gravity of the sort of number of plays, spins, uses across the sort of user spectrum. So that's something to keep in mind as we go along as well. I guess maybe we just have a few minutes here. I would love for each of you to talk a little bit about sort of what you see from your lens happening tangibly over the next 12 months or so, right? You know what I mean? Like, as opposed to like in the future, this will be wonderful, it's going to exist, and it's going to solve all of our problems, which is all great. But what are some of the things that either you see or you feel you can actually, sort of state as near-term objectives, let's say over a 12 to 18-month period of time, in terms of moving the blockchain and music rights forward? Marko, maybe I'll start with you.
I think I'll give an example of the kinds of things that might be built once we have the kind of registries that we have. I think there's a lot of tangible progress in terms of building out for the Open OMI, the Open Music Initiative, and we hope to have something in the spring that we can point to and poke at and break and see how it's all coming together. But I'll give another example, which is more for music fans. If we had a place to query this kind of information, and forget what it's built on, media chain, some other blockchain, IPFS or whatever, and these are just examples of existing services or companies, here's an example of a system. We all use streaming services in this room, I'm pretty sure. There is a big discourse about artists not being paid enough. And I don't take a position on it, but this is what some people say. And it's all legal and so on. But what if we had some way of listening to every music that you listen to on, I'm just sketching because I'm a product designer. Yeah. And you listen to music and we create a Bitcoin wallet for you in which you put, let's say, $3 equivalent of Bitcoin at the beginning of the month. And then at the end of the month, we split this evenly as a gift to the artists, equally distributed. Now, this is not paying for a recording. It's in addition to whatever I paid for Tidal or Apple Music, but it's going direct. And this incentivizes artists to create Bitcoin wallets. And this kind of a decentralized, untakedownable system is, I think, interesting. Obviously, that is, from a point of some players in the music industry, that might seem problematic. But I think that would lead to adoption and artists having the wallet infrastructure on the other side. And so I'm betting that something like that will exist as a weekend or two hack over the next year.
Got it. Turo?
I'm pretty sure that in the next 12 months, collective management societies will have their first blockchain implementations, and I hope that Teosto will be in that group as well. I guess it's not about the technology, it's more about the people and the fear behind this whole blockchain discussion. So what I would like to say in the end, this is perhaps for the whole community of organizations like us, is just don't be afraid. If you are doing your job well, it's going to get fine.
Got it. Bruno, how about you? What do you see happening in the next 12 to 18 months? Or what would you like to see?
Well, for ourselves, I mean, we focus a lot more B2B, not so much B2C in terms of creating consumer applications. The idea for us is to really continue on the mission we started of codifying trust or digitizing these relationships between digital assets and rights holder. And being able to kind of have a more efficient marketplace, you need this trust level to really increase. And the transparency you get from defining who are the rights holders to the digital assets and attributing them to attributing the transactions to the proper assets and rights holder, to me, is the key, and making that faster and better. And I think our interest is in using blockchain technology to just make that more efficient.
Right. And then, you know, on just to close up here, on sort of some of the efforts that I'm focused on, in addition to sort of some of the things that were discussed, I would love to have 2 or 3 actual end-to-end use cases that actually demonstrate very concretely, you know, both the power of and also the benefits associated with how the chain can help. So in .blockchain music land, we have, hopefully within the next few months, we'll have actual engagement with a major PRO, a major publisher, and a major DSP in sort of a true implementation, if you will, of creating the collective truth and the trust amongst those parties as a starting point, which we hope will actually turn some heads, if you will, and get people more excited about the power and potential of this thing. That's the amount of time apparently we have. I hope this was informative and instructive. I'd like to thank the panelists who joined us today, and thank you for attending. We'll be doing a workshop, I think, right after this, for those of you who want to dig in deeper. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruno. Be good.
Bye.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you.